Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Our Own Devices with Nandagopal Rajan. This time, we're doing something different, and we have a couple of guests instead of the one guest that we have usually. But the two guests have one common thread, and that is how education is changing in India around the time of the pandemic, in the post pandemic, and even as technology progresses, how there are new avenues opening up for education. We have with us Anand Srinivas, who is a CEO and founder of StayQrious, which is an edtech platform, and Rajeev Singh, who is from BenQ. He's the India head of BenQ, which I guess a lot of us know as a company that is popular for its projectors in India. Welcome to the show, Mr. Singh and Srinivas.
Thank you, Nandagopal, and I'm really honored to be on this platform with all the viewers and listeners.
Same here.
Okay, Anand, let me start with you because there has been a lot of conversation about edtech, over the past couple of years, and a lot of us have had our kids sort of experiment with it or explore edtech in one way or the other because there are so many different types of platforms. And even if you look at examples coming out for examples coming out from some parts of the country, even YouTube has become an edtech platform in a way because you have state governments that run their complete education system, the entire curriculum on YouTube, like Kerala does it, for instance. So, like, how is Stay Curious different, or how do you approach the problems that you're trying to solve, differently?
Oh, absolutely. So the core problem that I saw, I was teaching physics in like physical classrooms for a while, and I was really popular, and a lot of children like you. And then you see that lecturing as a method, right, is fundamentally very limiting. It hardly creates learning outcomes. And I thought that I'm the super awesome teacher, and then after like a few months, when you really expect children to demonstrate learning, you realize that a lot of what we do causes pseudo learning. That's what I like to call it. Basically, there's a lot of teaching going on, but the learning is really less. And since then, most of my work has been a single problem, which is there is this area of research called learning science, which tells how the human brain learns. And if you look at conventional education, it is not built on learning science. It's built on just traditional practices. And what we know is that if you make the education system learning science based, you get like two standard deviations of improvement. Basically, 90%, 95% of children will behave like toppers, will reach outcomes that like you typically expect only like self-motivated learners to do. So what I'm essentially building with Stay Curious is the world's first like brain science based, learning science based neo school. It's an entire school infrastructure shipped online to you so that we can finally move. The mission is to move conventional education, transform it to becoming learning science based. And the best way to do it is on one of the best ways to do it is online. And we can talk about why. Online actually has some advantages over offline. The common mistake is to use online to replicate offline practices, like as if offline works. And a better way to do it is to actually use online to reinvent what happens in a classroom, the teacher's role, the UI of the classes. There's a microphone, all of this happens. And you can actually use it to increase what students do, which is what causes learning. I can talk more at depth, but essentially the idea is create a learning science based education using online.
If I can come to you, Mr. Singh, BenQ is enabling the other side in a way, right? And but with elements of virtual, elements of online, and things like, I'm 42 years old. Things that we were not exposed to, maybe, I went to college and we used to have something called an OHP, which was the epitome of technology in those days. But here we are talking about projectors which have interactive elements to it, which bring or make even offline education a little bit more interactive. You can actually interact with the internet in case you want. So how is that evolving?
Very pertinent question, Rajan. I would like to put it in, I would divide this into two time frames. One is before pandemic, and second is during pandemic, right up to now. So before pandemic, of course, this was realized that the way the education is delivered in the conventional classroom, which is through a blackboard and the traditional way of using the textbook, etc., actually the retention capability of kids gets limited by that way of learning. So again, through learning science, it was revealed that if you have the same content in a more interesting multimedia concept involving the videos, graphs, etc., those kind of things, and you are able to deliver this in the classroom, then the retention of the kids is better as compared to traditional way of teaching. So this became like an aid to the traditional teaching, not a replacement of the traditional teaching. And it was mainly for the classroom use. Uh, and this concept started in India about close to about 12 years back. And the India, because of we have such a huge number of young population, the number of classrooms which are there only in the school segment, K-12 segment in India, are almost about a 1 crore.
Okay.
And up till now, only about 5 lakh classrooms have this kind of a concept, what we call as a smart class, where you actually use the content is there in a multimedia format, and it is being delivered to the student in the classroom by the teacher, using a computing device and a projector along with the interactive whiteboard, or the other device which is used for this is an interactive flat panel, which is an all-in-one device, which is again an interactive computing and the display inbuilt into it. And that's how you deliver in the classroom. This was found to be useful, and because of that there has been a gradual increase in the number of classrooms using this kind of concept. However, till now only about 5 lakh classrooms use it. That means we have only a 5% penetration of this way of teaching in the school. During the pandemic, the classrooms were not you can't go to the classroom. Then there was a need to deliver the education to the student at home. So some had this content, others were not even having. So even this content, if you had, how do you deliver it to kids in an interactive manner and be able to communicate, kind of replicate what was there in the classroom and add on to it? So the new system was evolved, that where you actually show this content to the kid, but you actually record the lecture in front of these devices using a high quality video camera and deliver it through various kind of apps as well as YouTube and TV channels, etc., etc., to the kid. And it can be a one way communication, or it can be also interactive. So this is what was the virtual education during the period of pandemic, which came about. And now is the time when schools have and colleges have reopened. Then it's not going to go back to the complete like earlier classroom teaching, but it will now remain a hybrid education. That means you will have kids in the classroom, you will have kids not in the classroom. What is being delivered in the classroom in an interactive manner has to be delivered to both the in-class students as well as students which are at home. And this kind of system is going to go forward, and this will really not only, it's not just related to pandemic, but going forward it will really increase the reach of education and also the quality of education to a much larger number of students. And in a country like India, which is so humongously populated, this will go in a big way to bring literacy and the meaningful literacy, the kind of literacy that we really need, which ultimately enables the jobs also.
If I can ask you an add-on question, you had 2 years when children were mostly online, and you had different types of formats catering to them. But suddenly, you have children coming back. But are their expectations also different now from an offline class? Do you think offline classes are
Yeah.
going to be different in the future? And in a way, you said
Yeah.
5% penetration of these virtual teaching tools that you had. Do you think the acceptance of that is going to be accelerated in the post pandemic thing? Because it's going to become a necessity, even even if you look at it from a demand perspective.
Yeah, so like it has become a necessity during the pandemic period to have a virtual education delivery to the students. Now in the new scenario, hybrid education will become a must-have thing. Also, very much during the time, what has happened in the way the kids have been taught during the last 2 years, their expectation of classroom teaching has also changed, and I think it has changed forever. It's not going to go back to the same thing in going forward now. There is definitely, people have learned in a better way, many of them who could have access to this education, and they would like to continue in the similar way. That means you need to have content delivery to students within the classroom also in a digital form, and also very much interactive, also pretty much in tune with what is there, or say on the net through the cloud you should be able to access, and in the classroom it should be shared by the teacher with the students on a real time basis. All these kind of expectations have, I think, very deeply set in into the mind of students now. So it is the future now is going to be driven by this kind of requirement from the student side.
So, Anand, if I can ask you, from a content perspective, also, what children have been exposed to in the past couple of years is very different from what they were, used to in offline, right? When they come back offline, do you think that content, how you teach, because of the exposure to edtech, and edtech, when we say edtech in this sense, is from the WhatsApp classes that kids had, to the Zoom classes, to the Microsoft Team classes, all sorts of classes. But you know a lot of children, I know, for instance, have come to school for the first time, or like, have just come from nursery, right away to class 3. So you have, so kids are exposed to something else completely. How do you cater, as an educationist, how do you cater to something like that? Is this going to be revolutionary in a way that, like, you have to completely change teaching methods also?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just like kind of catalyzed this teaching change that should have happened anyway. Because there are world class explainers, and schools sometimes act as if they don't exist, right? Like, so we tend to like replicate lectures in a room, but now students actually see I can go learn like this particular topic anywhere, and they understand that knowledge is not like the primary layer. Like for a long time, just knowledge was the most important thing, right? Like we couldn't even provide that, and then making access to that was like the big deal. Now that's kind of become base level explanations. If you want to understand what fractions are, somebody's out there to teach you. But you know what that allows us to do? You can use school for much more interesting things. So what you can do is actually make children create things using the knowledge. Like for example, maybe they'll take the role of a SpaceX engineer and then design a spacesuit using Newton's laws. And in school, what most of the time you spend on is working together, collaborating with each other, and developing that social skills that actually matter. And getting better at these real life skills like critical thinking, all of these, but using the core content they have to learn anyway. So if you have to do that using some other content, that doesn't matter. So the lovely thing is that children actually, once they experience this in some online platforms like ours, they're expecting, the big question they're asking is, why is school not like this? And that was the whole hope we were wanting. Like, what if we just have an opportunity to have people ask, hey, but school can be like this, right? It's a little hard to do offline because there are some limitations. Like sometimes you want your room to be a lecture room, sometimes typical classroom, but sometimes you want it to be a library, sometimes a lab, sometimes it's a workshop. But a class can't just shape shift like that easily, an offline class. But online, the advantage you have is the UI. It's like iPhone versus QWERTY keyboards. You can just like move the UI of the classroom to be whatever. If you want people to not distract each other, you can quickly have them quiet in their own rooms, working on things. They can work together, collaborate on things. So all of those, I think children, once they've experienced, they're like, hey, actually learning can be fun. I can go to a classroom and actually do things. It feels like kind of going to an enjoyable job. I think that's changed forever, and I hope children actually set the bar high now on like what education should achieve, and not just like reduce it to I will stand and lecture at you, which is what might be expected out of education typically.
So, is that also going to manifest in the fact that interactivity, is something kids might actually expect in an offline classroom also, and you would need products like what BenQ are providing to bring that layer into your offline classroom? I would like both of you to sort of weigh in on that.
Yeah, I mean, to add in my 2 cents, and he's obviously much more experienced here. Like, I think that what kind of technology will come into the offline classroom will start with these, and then they'll expand more. I think it'll expand into more than delivery. It'll expand into other kinds of collaboration. All of those will happen, and BenQ might lead the way on that. Yeah.
Yeah, so interactivity. See, before pandemic, the focus was mainly on the interactivity of the device from the teacher side. The teachers is able to interact with the device. Now, going forward, definitely there will be a expectation and requirement, and market will change, and the education will change of interactivity of students with the device and the content. So it has to be a two-way interactivity, and both for the students which are in the classroom, and students which are not in the classroom should be able to interact with the teacher and with the device using the technology. That will become the real need of education for it to be effectively delivered to students in future.
So often when we have conversations like this, the immediate counter in a country like India is, hey, you are talking about a very niche segment, a very urban segment. But is there also changing on the ground where you see technology actually enabling this kind of education across the board, going down into the small villages? Is that kind of an access also coming up in India now?
Very much so, because even if we look at before the pandemic, the installation base that we have in India, I told you there are about 5 lakh classrooms. So out of that, about 3 lakh classrooms are done by BenQ using a projector or an interactive flat panel. And almost like about 35% of this is slightly more than one third, are in like D and E class cities. So it already the need of using the technology in the, even in the smaller town, has been very much there. And why the schools have gone over there? Because kids want, their parents want, so there is a demand for this. Otherwise the school in the smaller cities wouldn't have gone for it. And now, but now going forward, it is the need, because this way of education is a must. You can't, like, now be a choosy that, I will have this thing because I want to have a better infrastructure and than the other school. Now it is all about being able to deliver quality of education. You need to have this. Only thing that how much of which aspect of technology you will enable in the classroom and which you will do it later, only that will be the point.
Anand, do you think education itself is is it maybe in the post-pandemic world, is it maybe moving from the lecture model to maybe a little bit of a broadcast model? Because like in the past 2 years, we have seen there is maybe some level of or some advantage there. Maybe for instance, if you're in a government school and you get your best physics teacher to teach every physics classroom in the state or in the country, that's taking everybody's access to education to a completely different level. Do you think those kind of changes might happen on the ground as we settle down into a post pandemic kind of a scenario?
Um, how we do this offline will be interesting, and online is like a slightly easier way to do this. I do think that a few good explainers can actually take the role of the explaining part away from everyone. And then, but that's not to say teaching is not that just makes teaching much more valuable, because now the teachers, and we call them learning coaches at StayQrious Neo School, they can spend all their effort in doing what really matters, which is actually pay attention to the students, see what goals to set for them, help them give by giving them feedback and helping them grow. I think that also kind of frees us up to like move the curriculum beyond what the traditional curriculum tries to achieve. So because you're the biggest bottleneck to doing this today is just the teacher time, and the teacher role is kind of constrained by what we have them do. But if you take that away and have like centralized teaching, so the way we implement it at Stay Curious is different though. The way we implement it is like there are centralized videos that everybody learns from. The explainers are like a few, and then everybody else is a learning coach. It's a new profession that we think will scale. But I think different versions of this will emerge even like offline, where like if you have a great explainer who everybody loves, then maybe they can teach all the classrooms, the lecturing part, and everything else somebody else can do.
Agree
Yeah.
with this. I think this is what is going to happen, because it's one thing to be able to give the knowledge about the concept of everything to the student, and second part is giving individual attention to the kid, identifying the learning needs, skilling the students, etc. That gradually, I think these two at some point at some of the institutes will start becoming two different paths,
Yeah.
and that's where you have the best of the knowledge coming to you, and a very individual attention to the students by somebody who is near to you.
So you actually go to a classroom, take a lecture, then come to your teacher to
Yeah.
to take that learning ahead, right? In a way, like that
Yeah.
two paths. A very interesting concept that you said. But as a company that works with multiple education institutions across the country, are you seeing very interesting use cases happen on the ground, Mr. Singh?
Very interesting use cases, yes, very much, because see, what for an example, how the coaching has taken during this period, because coaching has been always been a very individual. See, what is coaching? So this is what we have been discussing, that you can have a broadcast kind of a thing by somebody who is very good, but then students need individual attention. So even in the schools, students were not getting this kind of a attention. That's why they were going to a coaching class. And this is what we are talking about. This way of education, when it starts, it will do away with lot of the need of actually going to different kind of coaching classes, because what they are doing is actually trying to do this. Yeah. However, still the availability of the best teacher to give you the concept may not be there. And what has happened during this pandemic time is that coaching has really evolved, because from being able to give this kind of individual attention, then being able to impart this kind of a thing over a completely virtual medium to education. Because we must remember that for last 2 years, while there were no physical classes for the classrooms of school, there were no coaching classes also for within the classroom. But coaching delivers this only very individualistic thing. So they evolved by delivering these lectures and interacting with the kids in a different way, so which was very innovative. And practically, I can tell you that there was practically no coaching center in India which had a virtual coaching setup. There were some coaches in India who were actually catering to the international audience, and only they were having a virtual delivery happening of education. And from there, in no time, within a period of 3 to 6 months only, the entire coaching setup in India got equipped themselves with this kind of infrastructure and way of teaching, which I think was a great transition during the pandemic time.
I'd like to wind up, Anand, by asking a slightly philosophical question. Where do you think, or how do you think edtech is going to be placed in a country like India? Is it going to be an OTT kind of a scenario where, along with all the classes or the physical classes, the offline classes that kids are going to, everybody is maybe going to learn something extra, or learn deeper, richer, based on the edtech platform that they are going to be logged into? How do you think edtech is going uh, to be yoked to the education system in India?
I have like a strong and clear opinion on this, as how we should go. Um, Traditional schooling does the baseline level of teaching. It meets the curriculum, like CBSE, ICSE, whatever it is, and gets you through to some level. But imagine what if you could use online to now upgrade everybody to an IB level education, because to provide something like that, it's extremely expensive, right? But the future I predict is hybrid schooling, where you do some amount of your learning offline, and then you do some amount of your learning online. And this combination, right, like, and we call this like a neo schooling movement, where you go to a regular school and then you go to a neo school after that. This gives you opportunities to get what would have been a world class education. For example, you might sit with a 6 member team that's like across the country, discuss it. Sometimes it might be across the world, which is very hard to do. Like, you're otherwise like constrained to the just the neighborhood physically that you have. You will learn things. Usually after school is thought of as a way to uh, get slightly better at the same curriculum, right? That's what we've used after school to do. But don't do that. Actually use it to go beyond the curriculum, learn the skills and knowledge that schools fundamentally find it hard to give, right? And that movement together, like, so traditional schooling plus neo schooling is what I think will be the future. And most children will find themselves learning like a few hours in the evening or in the afternoon online, and go to a traditional school in the daytime. And the traditional school itself would change, like Rajiv was saying, and then the neo school in the evening would be different, and that's kind of the future that I predict would happen.
So that is very clearly a very fascinating future, and the kind of education maybe we all did not have. And on that thought, I think it's time to say thank you to Anand and Rajiv for a very insightful session on how education itself is transforming. Maybe a little bit of a push from a pandemic never we never wanted, but maybe it's all it is the silver lining that maybe we could look for in this very dark cloud that we have had for the past 2 years. Thank you both of you for being on the show.
Thank you so much.
Thank Yeah, thank you so much.
So this is Nandagopal Rajan again saying bye. We'll be back again next week with another guest or maybe another set of guests. Till then, we are available everywhere you listen to your podcasts.